So, homage. Wow.
Much paid. Now let's establish roots, class.
For a game that's been cooking for more than half a decade, Concord left way too much to the future promise instead of filling our plates like they should have from the start. Most likely due to the high realism style, the cosmetics in the game at launch were pretty much the bare bones palette swaps you'd expect for lower rarities, with a few exceptions of decent legendaries like Itzy and Amari. The Galactic Guide actually had a solid amount of lore and universe building pretty much on par with the Star X franchises we know well, but without anything unlockable or rewarded for gaining lore XP, it kinda felt hollow, as you weren't doing anything like collecting audio logs in hidden locations to add up to this progression, but instead just overwhelmed from the start with a ton of text if you wanted to learn more. And while an open training mode is expected, for the price tag only releasing a tutorial that covers 3 characters, with time trials for only 5, showed that Concord clearly had more in the tank for the future, but constantly begs the question why you wouldn't have given us more at launch, especially when charging an arm and a leg above the main competitors. However, most of that honestly isn't that big a deal to me if you have fun characters and unique gameplay mechanics to explore, which Concord truly did have. Watching the battlefield change each round as players flooded it with deplorables, and seeing who was smart enough to counterpick one off to clean up and get extra trash bombs is the type of emergent gameplay I would have loved to see evolve over time. The crew bonuses were accentuated more in the full release, and definitely impactful on gameplay, but sadly these cool twists on the hero shooter formula were kinda shown on the sidelines instead of promoted as the big hooks of the game. Which leads us to what was supposed to be the crown jewel of Concord's gameplay, the high end of their sweatstrum, the Rivalry mode. While Ranked was absent from this game's launch, another "why would you leave this out" frustration, perhaps teased by this unavailable zone that we'll possibly never know of now. Rivalry was pretty much the fill-in for Ranked, and what I assume would be the format used when an actual Ranked matchmaking system were to drop. And by the end of my time with Concord, playing on the last day as the window of server availability crept to a close, I ended up hating Concord's Rivalry mode. Rivalry has 2 game modes, a single location capture, and another that takes a twist on spike planting and defusing, with neither team on attack or defense, but both having to fight to capture the spike in the middle and then plant it in one of 2 locations. Most importantly with the Rivalry game list is that unlike the first 2 playlists, and unlike most hero shooters in the Overwatch style in general that mainly have respawn modes for competitive, Concord's Rivalry modes were both most similar to Valorant or Counter-Strike in having single lives per round, promoting that more strategic and patient play, but also allowing these bursts of freneticism as the game naturally had more expressive movement and various heals and shields to let you jump in and out of combat more often. Especially with Rivalry being first to 4, some might feel that it's a bit quick, but it makes pretty good sense when tying together the other unique aspects of Concord. With Rivalry ending anywhere between 4 and 7 rounds, this actually meant you really had to think about your character choices, as you couldn't just throw away a round or 2 to get a good crew bonus, or waste a whole round setting up deplorables as Lark or Kips, but letting your teammates die and get a loss. In theory, it's a really delicate balance between choosing when to play your best characters, when to go for crew bonuses and which ones you need, and how committed you need to be towards adding deplorables of your own or removing the enemies, all coordinating this with your team to come up with the best composition each round, building off the previous rounds. For me, this was absolutely the biggest draw of Concord, and the main reason I was genuinely intrigued by the game. I've never played a shooter that was more in the Overwatch style with heavy movement and healing and variety of abilities, but still trying the single life competitive round like Valorant or Counter-Strike. And it honestly was a really cool mix of styles when you added on the deplorables and crew bonuses. So why did this hook of the game that clearly caught my eye at first end up as my least favorite mode? Well, last week, pretty much just as quickly as it dropped, it flopped, as Firewalk Studios announced Concord servers were going offline and refunds on their way to those who bought in. Even with a fairly abysmal launch, this caught me off guard. They had a roadmap for at least 2 seasons in the next quarter of a year. There's an episode of that new Prime gaming show featuring Concord, and with all the resources Sony put into it over the years, it seems pretty wild they would just pull the plug with very little notice and no real info on what their plan going forward is going to be. I wouldn't be surprised if for many of the devs and crew members of Concord, this was the worst couple weeks of their lives. To see the thing you've poured the last half a decade of your life into just get continually dogged for being too late to the party, having those real questionable decisions like the price tag clearly showing how far the executive meddling went with this one, feeling yourself filled with dread of the uncertainty for the game until you finally hear that it actually is time to pull the plug, now with that fear of uncertainty moving on to your own job security. Well, at least for the final 3 days of Concord being online, this little universe of free gunners that had amassed ourselves could play with these unique gameplay twists on the hero shooter, right? Surely the people who bought into the game are feeling for the devs, probably not too disappointed since we get full refunds at least, but would want to spend the final days of Concord's existence actually playing Concord, right? Well, no, not right. Somewhat poetically, you could say, as Concord received notice of its impending demise, the mass suicides of free gunners began, with literally every joinable match of Rivalry turning into an elephant graveyard of cheesers seeking another platinum trophy for the collection. The trophy list for Concord was pretty straightforward, really just pushing you to play every character a bunch to promote the core gameplay aspect of crew bonuses and team building. But naturally, the grind to profile level 100 was what most people were missing come the announcement. And like a switch flip, it just pretty much cannibalized the entire game, turning the last 3 days into really just 2 separate playlists. One for those who wanted to play the game, and one for those who just wanted a trophy. Now don't get me wrong, completely valueless video game achievements are my bread and butter. I eat that shit up just as much as the next trophy hunter, with thousands total and almost 100 platinums to my name as of this recording. And of course, people can do whatever they want with a game they bought. If you want to buy a game just to literally dick around in the settings menu for hours, it's your right to, I guess. But I suppose what's disappointed me the most about the final days of Rivalry mode is that this wasn't the random bots whining DEI or some kind of general public trolling, but this is from the people who actually did buy the game, who supposedly saw something they enjoyed in it and wanted to support the devs in creation for whatever the reasons were that appealed to them. Someone were to say Concord totally disappointed them, so they honestly didn't give a shit about the game at that point and just wanted the plat, that'd be probably the best reason for me to hear. I mean, I'll be the first to say that with what they showed up to at the table, Concord definitely should not have had such a steep price tag, if having one at all. So I can get a little spite over feeling jacked out of $40, especially when so much of buying into Concord was for that promise of the future, a future that's now been cancelled or at the least put on indefinite pause. But actions speak louder than words, as they say, and I find it hard to believe anyone who says they genuinely wish well for the developers and hope they get another chance, but completely decimated the viability of the main unique game mode they wanted to create. I find it hard to believe people actually want less toxic multiplayer experiences to better the perception of gamers and the actual interactions we have, when they're willing to prevent other players from even accessing a part of the game because the second they can gain something individually, all that for the greater good bullshit goes right out the window. I mean, maybe Concord pulls some PT shit, and eventually consoles with the game installed and a full trophy list can be sold for exorbitant amounts of cold hard cash. Sure, good luck with that one. But I've got my share of platinums as mentioned. Like, nobody's gonna fuck you for it, nobody's gonna pay you for it. So what is it? Just having that trophy on the shelf? A snapshot of the experience? And again, I absolutely understand in a certain way because I love the snapshot in time that an achievement makes. And a full trophy list does hit that completionist bell for me and give some sentimental accomplishment for sure. But this wasn't just doing some easy mindless grind for a long haul platinum. This was choosing to spend the final hours of a game's existence not actually playing the game, knowing that you literally might not ever get to play it again, just to get a snapshot of that experience, of skipping the entire experience, while actively preventing others from genuinely experiencing all of the game themselves. Perhaps we'll see Concord again in the future, perhaps not. It'll be funny when their episode of that Amazon show drops and they bubble back into the collective consciousness again for a little bit, but I've got no idea what the future holds. Hopefully a return as a free-to-play game with an art style people like better could give it another chance, because the core gameplay twists really did have some fun ideas, and I'll definitely miss some of their more unique character designs like One-Off and Lark, in addition to the busted classic styles of Lennox and Baz. While Rivalry was the main thing that interested me about Concord from the start, it became my least favorite aspect of the whole game period at the end, because it was just unplayable. And not only unplayable, but it became a stark parallel to the bigger issue of the genre problem of Concord, that the multiplayer experience is ultimately governed by multiple players and how they decide to interact. Therefore, on the last day of Concord, I went back to my roots as a brawl boy, and had a lot of fun just getting to play the game. As most of us are just gamers and consumers and we can't really do much for the people who put all their efforts into making something, the least I could do was actually mess around with what I liked about what they were cooking, to the best of what was available to me, and make some final memories and grush shots above the North Star before they boarded up, as a brawl boy. Conversely, I can't think of a better way to kick the dev team while they're already down than to end Concord in the mass exodus that Rivalry became, probably sealing the nail in the coffin that it'll never come back, when even the people who bought into your game would literally rather kill themselves than keep playing with only hours left. But hey, I'm not a game dev, so maybe Firewalk should just get good. What happened to the rest of the pavilion? Whatever happened to Gusto? Whatever happened to the pavilion? Whatever happened to the pavilion? There's a pavilion full of Gusto, and I didn't even know the Gusto. I didn't even know about Goo. I didn't know about Goo. I didn't know about Grass. I didn't know about you. I didn't want a Grandison. I didn't want a Brandon. I had no Grandison. I didn't even know about Grandison. Brandon, everybody on trains. Lavender and the butter's in the wind. The butter's in the